Hello, and thank you for joining us here at Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga, and each week we invite you to send in your questions and we'll explore the fascinating stories around the history of the city of Mississauga together. Like, subscribe, and follow us, and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. For this week's episode, we received an inquiry from Beryl around an old schoolhouse, former schoolhouse on Mississauga Road, just north of Dundas. Many refer to it as, or referred to it over the years as the Erindale Public School or the Springbank Visual Arts Center, amongst other names. But it does have a long ties to the early years of education in our city, and it is not alone. But we'll start with the question that Beryl asked, and again, thank you, Beryl, for the question. What's the story of the old schoolhouse? Well, depending on when you interacted with the building or how long you've been in Mississauga, it was a public school, a nursery school, a community center, an art center, an alumni office. It served many functions over its years. It stood for 100 years now. It was built in 1922, and of course here we are in 2022. Originally, it was built as the former school section number 4, SS number 4, Erindale Public School, and it was on Mississauga Road, just north of Dundas Street, and it opened its doors again in 1922. This building was actually the third school to serve the children in historic Erindale Village. The building was built adjacent to an earlier 1872 schoolhouse. The building we see today, that survives today, that you're referring to, it actually houses the bell from that 1872 schoolhouse in the building today. In 1957, a new public school was built in nearby Erindale Woodlands, and this building served, and it became the Springfield Public School, which still survives today. The old Erindale Public School became known as the Springbank Community Center and also served as a nursery school for a time. And from 1981 until 2007, it was home to Visual Arts Mississauga. In 2007, the building became part of the University of Toronto Mississauga campus, serves as an alumni center, a works office, the parking office, etc. So it continues to have a function in the community, continues to be tied to education, but no longer serves as the public school. But back to the school years of the building. Many students learn the 3 R's in this building. A former student who attended the school here in the 1940s recalled wonderfully described snowy days at the schoolhouse. Going to school was not a chore, but a rather absolute delight. The generosity of a local farmer, Grafton Belford, meant that we didn't have to trudge along the snow on the pretend sidewalks, dangerously slipping and sliding our way along Dundas Street and the Streetsville Road, now Mississauga Road. No, indeed, we traveled in style. Mr. Belford would come along on his tractor, pulling a long, flat wagon or sleigh covered with a deep layer of straw. He would pick up all the school children from Erindale Village and beyond and chauffeur us to school. How pleasant it was to sit in the straw singing our favorite songs, chatting, joking, and teasing. Once at school, we had lots of time to play fox and geese and other games in the pristine field of snow behind the school. We built snow forts and snowmen, made snow angels, played frozen tag, and had snowball fights, of course. I don't recall any teachers being on duty or in the schoolyard or any injuries from snowballs or being told that we must not release our pent-up energy. Childhood was childhood in those days, virtually free from any interference in artificial rules. We were encouraged to work out our own problems and have fun. The school itself was small and represented the whole community in those days. We played and worked together, accepted responsibility for our actions, and were good neighbors, a credit to our teachers and our parents. Our childhood days were in many ways idyllic, innocent, carefree, and happy. What a nice little connection to the schoolhouse. The schoolhouse that we know today saw its first students in October of 1922. The formal opening of the school, however, took place on June 4th of 1923. The architect for the building was D.R. Franklin of Toronto, while the contractor was Arthur Beryl of Streetsville. Plumbing, heating, and wiring were undertaken by James McMahon of Port Credit, and plastering by F.G. Haddon of Streetsville. And the painting was by George McClintock of Streetsville. It's wonderful that we have all these things connected. So yes, it was designed by a Toronto architect, but the contractor who built it, Arthur Beryl of Streetsville. The building is a particularly fine example of early 20th century neoclassical and colonial revival architecture. In 1952, 2 wings, or additional classrooms, were added to the building, enlarging the building from 2 classrooms to 4. In 1996, the old schoolhouse was designated under the terms of the Ontario Heritage Act, and it remains a beloved and familiar community landmark today, 100 years after it was built. So again, Beryl, thank you so much for the question. We're going to keep on the theme of other schoolhouses, just things we can explore here this week on Ask a Historian. And there are several other former schoolhouses that continue to be part of our landscape here in the city of Mississauga. On the southwest side of Dixie Road and Dundas Street is the former Dixie Public School building. Opened in 1923, this 4-room school was built as a replacement for the smaller log schoolhouse that had been built in 1844. Increasing suburbanization in the 1950s forced the old school to close its doors in the spring of 1960, and students were transferred to the new Dixie Road Public School. For a time, the building was used as an office by the Ministry of Transportation before being purchased in 1983 by the Serbian Orthodox Church of St. Sava, and it continues to function today as part of that church. Another old schoolhouse is the Old Britannia Schoolhouse, and this is one where there's actually books that have been published on it, and you're able to read some of the tales around the schoolhouse. The late Ben Medill, who passed away in 2013, left behind a treasure trove of memories and recollections about his life and times in historic Mississauga, and particularly focused on the community of Britannia and on the Old Britannia Schoolhouse. In particular, his book, Britannia School and School Farm and My School Days, captures a period of time and conveys a wonderful story of rural historic Mississauga and life in a 1-room schoolhouse that still, thanks in parts to the effort and support of many, many others, including the Friends of the Schoolhouse and the Peel District School Board, the former SS or School Section Number 12 of Toronto Township continues to be a functioning entity in our city today. The schoolhouse was first built in 1852, replacing an earlier frame school building. A date of 1876 has often been given for the schoolhouse, but this date likely refers to repairs and alterations to the older 1852 building. The Old Britannia Schoolhouse welcomed generations of children between 1852 and 1959 when it closed its doors. Since 1982 and continuing today, students and public have had the opportunity to visit the Old Britannia Schoolhouse and participate in first-person historical reenactments of early settlement life here in Mississauga. Another another former schoolhouse that survives and continues to be a landmark in our city today is the former Meadowvale Public School. The school was built on land donated by the Simpson family in 1871. And the Meadowvale Community Hall building, as it's known today, served as Meadowvale Village's second schoolhouse. The school itself, the former school, is on the south side of Old Dairy Road at Second Line West, in Meadowvale Village Heritage Conservation District. Known as School Section 15, SS 15, but unlike the larger communities in the region, Meadowvale did not have a grammar school, and students wishing to receive higher education had to travel once their public school years were done to either Streetsville or Brampton. In 1959, a larger, more modern public schoolhouse was built to serve the community, and since 1968, this building, the former SS number 15 in Meadowvale Village, has been used as a community hall. Extensive restoration work was undertaken in 1980-81 and in 1993. Another former schoolhouse is in Streetsville, and this is the former Maiden Lane Public School. In 1884, a large brick addition was added to the former Methodist Chapel on Maiden Lane in Streetsville, and from 1884 to 1939, this building, with the new addition, served as the Streetsville Public School. Again, this school remained in operation until 1939, when it was moved to its present location on Queen Street. It became the village's municipal offices and fire hall. The Public Utilities Commission for Streetsville continued to use this building until 1977. The original red brick building has been covered in stucco, and when additions were added to the building in its present commercial form on Queen Street. But this again is an 1884 public school that's served as the Maiden Lane Public School in Streetsville before Russell Langmaid Public School was built on the same site. And our last former schoolhouse that continues to be in our community today is the former Streetsville Grammar School. This is located on the Queen Street at the south end of Streetsville. It's an iconic building or landmark with its tower, currently undergoing significant restoration work under the direction of the city of Mississauga. Streetsville's Grammar School was the first secondary school built in Peel County. Initial enrollment was about 15 to 20 students in the original rear wing of the building. The front addition with a landmark tower was erected in 1877 and increased the capacity of the school to between 80 and 100 students who journeyed from the far surrounding areas from far and wide around historic Mississauga. New schools were being built in the 1950s and the building ceased to be used as a school. It was converted first to a town hall and then served as a police station, even with a jail, in the 1960s. And the building is now, although owned by the city of Mississauga, is utilized today as the Kinsman Senior Citizen Center in Streetsville. But the old Streetsville Grammar School continues to be a beloved landmark in the city of Mississauga. So, as you can see, just from that brief overview, if you will, there were many schoolhouses. There are several schoolhouses that survive in Mississauga today that harken back to kind of a rural, earlier age. Although we had many more that do not as well. And there again, every community had a schoolhouse, and there were dozens of them around the city. But several do survive, and it is a neat way to look back on the history of our city and kind of that emergence between the rural farm of communities to the modern city we see today. And perhaps it's a kind of a fascinating tribute or a fascinating idea that so many do continue to survive and function, even if it is in new capacities on our landscape today. So with that, thank you for joining us for another episode of Ask a Historian. Please send in your questions each and every week, and we'll continue to explore the fascinating stories of the city of Mississauga together. Like, subscribe, and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. And we will see you next week on another episode of Ask a Historian.